Welcome to Class 2. We're going to pick it right back up from Class 1. Class 2 will be a brush tools demo and an introduction to auto paint. Okay, so now let's go through the paint tools over here on the left. I'm just going to the fresh frame here, and we'll start with the top tool, which is the black and white tool. So it's pretty self-explanatory. When I use the paintbrush here, you can see that it's turning my image into a black and white image. Okay, so then if we go to the next tool, this is the blemish tool, and this is actually a great tool. It combines the blur tool and the grain tool. So it's really good for small areas. Let me just resize my brush here. Small areas, imperfections, and blending. So if I want to use this on a little spot there, you can see it just disappears. And if I zoom in, you can see that the grain is a little heavy, and you have to go in and just maybe adjust it a bit here. And then maybe I'll make my grain a little bit smaller. And then if I paint again, you can see it's just a little bit more subtle. I can even use an opacity of 50%. And paint it that way. So I suggest once you get the settings that you like, that I would make it a preset for sure, so you don't have to keep going back and changing your settings. And that is a really great tool. And another thing to note is that when you are going frame to frame, that the grain does randomize. Okay, so the next tool down the list is the blur tool. We'll go to a fresh frame here. And this is a good time to introduce the compare modes. So here you can see you have the different compare modes here. And when I'm in the blur tool, I'm going to actually click the vertical split. And you can see this little arrow here down at the bottom of the screen. And now, however the brush tool is set, you can see that is blurred on the right. I can drag this to compare. So now I can see if I want to paint with the blur tool, let's zoom in a little bit here, that I can see what the effect's going to be before I start painting. And say if I wanted to maybe paint this area here, but I really wanted to see what the quality of the blur was like right next to it, closer to where I'm painting, I can click the vertical bar tool on the right of the keyboard, or otherwise known as the pipe if you're a Linux user. So shift vertical bar, and then the split goes right to where my cursor is, and I find that helpful. So if I want to have my split here, my cursor is over the surfer, I hit the hotkey, and then I have the vertical split right there. So that if I want to change the parameters, I can just see here that what's a lot less blurry or a lot blurrier. I can change the opacity. So then it's a really nice interactive tool. And I'll click that off. And next we'll go to the detail tool. So this is the little triangle here. And here it sharpens and smooths your image based on the parameters that you set inside this box right here. So if I want to just be a little more extreme here and dial up all the values, what I'm doing here is I'm going to change my opacity to 100% and make my brush a little bit bigger. If I paint here, you can see that I am really pulling up a lot of that detail. And it's not just sharpness, it's detail on different levels. And you can play around here to figure out, well, what kind of detail do you want to be emphasized or de-emphasized. So here I'm bringing up a lot of detail and sharpness. But if I wanted to actually bring down the detail and have it a blurrier result, or a smoother result, I should say, you can see here that is not painted. If I go to the next frame and I toggle back and forth, it's subtle, but it definitely smooths out the detail, especially if you use the fine parameter here. It's very good. It's really helpful for beauty work. So I can reset those, and you have choice to gang them, or you can use the different pull down options here, the midtones, the highlights, or full. So I suggest playing around with this tool. It's very powerful and sophisticated. Okay, next we're going to just do a little bit of demoing inside the clone tool, and this is where I spend most of my time. So here you see we're inside the clone tool, and I have my cursor here. But the clone tool, what it really does is that it pulls your paint either from the same image or from a different image. So for example, I want to paint this surfer somewhere else. And the way to do that is that I hold down the shift key, I click on the surfer, and I drag to the area where I want to paint. So where my cursor is here on the right is where I'm going to paint. So I let go, and then when I paint, you can see I am painting the surfer. So I can use the same frame. You can see here, I can change the frame offset. I can rotate, I can scale, I can subpixel. There's just a lot of different options here. They have a dual clone brush, which is very handy for targets and painting things that are that really need two offsets at the same time. But rather going into a lot of detail right now, we're just going to save that for another class, and we'll go down to the color tool where we were before. And so, like I said, we've already sort of gone through this tool. And one thing I did not go over is that you have these different blending modes. So for example, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. I'm just going to choose a blue color, and we'll go for 50% opacity. So if I have the normal over the normal mode here, and then if I want to try the tint, you can see it's just a different mode. So you really do have a lot of painting choices with all these different tools. Okay, so then we'll go on to the color correct, and we'll turn on go to a new frame here, and we'll just turn on the split as well. So now you can see I have my split here, and if I want to paint with a brush with more saturation, you can see here that on the right, it becomes more saturated, and that's what my brush is going to be painting with if I choose that value. So this is, like I said, you have a lot of choices when you want to have more control over how you're painting or what you're painting. I'm just going to reset that, and we'll go on to the next brush. So here are the dodge and the burn tools. And I will just turn off the compare mode. So these are updated now, and they perform quite well. So it's hard to see on the screen here unless I go, to the extremes. So the dodge and the burn, I can change my opacity, and you can see that it's a really nice tool. And next we have the cutout tool. So while I'm not going to demo this tool right now, I will just talk you through the interface. So you have the choice of whether you want to use your source or RGBA. So that is if your image has an alpha channel. So for example, if I had wanted to clone paint just the surfboard, I could actually make a selection around the whole surfer. But if I had an alpha of just the surfboard, when I was doing my stamping for the cutout, I would just have the surfboard. If I don't have an alpha, I can just use RGB, and I can also use a rotospline as well to help me with my selection for the cutout. And next we have the drag tool here. So it's really like a smudge tool. I'm going to zoom in and make my brush a little bit smaller. So you see if I'm just dragging, I can paint motion blur this way or just smudge, a little bit of smudging. If I want, so this mix is mixing 50% between what I'm dragging from and onto, and I can change that value as well if I want it to be less, a little more subtle. And same with the decay, but I usually don't change this decay that much. I just keep it at the default at 90, and that works pretty well, but I do play with the mix. Then we have the eraser tool right here. It looks like a little eraser. So I'm going to go and I'm going to paint something that we can erase. I'll go up to normal. So we say we have some blue we've painted here, but we don't want that, or maybe we've just painted too much into the arm. I can go to the eraser tool here. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller, and I can just erase away, change the opacity and maybe soften the part that I overpainted in. And while we're in this tool, I'm going to go over how you can delete your paint strokes. This is another topic for when we are doing some other shot work. But here you can see I will go to a new frame. And if I'm in the color tool and I say I've painted something and say I don't want this, I can either Command Z, or if I paint again, say I don't want this stroke, I can actually click on this, click the trash can tool here, and you can see that I want to delete and rebuild the frame. Yes. So now my paint stroke is gone and I'm back to my original frame. The eraser tool is a little bit more for, I think, refining edges, little areas that you just want to paint away. You don't really want to get rid of the whole, all of your painting. You're just going to do a little bit of finessing around the edges. And then here we have grain tool. So this is like before, that's mixed in with the blemish tool. We have the parameters down here. And so you can add grain back onto your image. And we'll just go up to 100%. Make this a little bit bigger. Let's go to an area where you can see it. So here you can see it's pretty big, not quite right, but you can finesse these parameters. So say you're painting something in your shot and things are getting a little bit soft and you want to add a little grain back in. This is a great tool to do that. And I suggest, again, like once you find the settings that you like for your shot, then I would save them as a preset. And next we have the mosaic tool. So this tool just turns the image into more of a pixelated image. It just paints the image into square tiles. And so we'll just take this down to like 10. And we'll just paint over. Sort of like a little witness protection brush here. And then next we have the repair tool here. Looks like a little wrench. If you drag from part of the image onto another part of the image, it's pulling down that color. You can reduce the opacity and have a subtler effect. And then next we have the scatter tool. It just scatters pixel in kind of a random fashion. I'm just going to turn up the opacity here. So it's a little more of a stylized look, stylized brush. And last we have the stroke tool. So the stroke tool displays all strokes highlighted in the viewer and in the paint history. So we haven't talked a lot about the paint history tab here, but we will for sure. So you can see now when I click this tool, all of my different strokes that I've made. And you can see them if I click on a stroke, you can see that they are highlighted inside of the paint history and inside the viewer. The last thing I want to demo for you in class 1 is the auto paint feature. So play this shot through, and what I want to do here is I want to paint a little more atmosphere into the horizon line. And to make that really smooth, I'm going to use auto paint. If I was painting frame by frame, it would probably be very choppy or chattery, and I also don't want to have to create a clean plate. So I'll stop my sequence here. And so when I do this, I also don't want to paint into the cliff area. So I needed to make a holdout mat, some roto, and to help me with that roto, I also did some tracking, and I'm going to use that tracking also for my auto paint. So if I go up to my roto node here, you can see I'll zoom in. I have a couple roto shapes here that are inside my cliff layer, and also inside my cliff layer is my tracker, which has driven my roto. So here is my tracking shape, and I'll turn that off, and then here's my cliff layer, and I'll go down to the paint node here. So inside the paint node, you can see I have this transform pull down, and I can choose the cliff layer. So, and the reason why I can see these different layers is because I have the roto and the paint node attached by their object output and inputs. So now I need to select what kind of paint stroke I want to make. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. So I want to paint a little bit of a peachy haze into the horizon. I'm going to select the color. So I'm going to hold my cursor over where the color I want to select and click the period key. And now you can see down here in my current color that I have my peachy color. I have my brush set up how I want it, 100% softness and about a 50% opacity. I'll just do a little test stroke to see if it's what I want. Okay, that's what I want and that works. I'll Command Z to get out of that. I'll make sure I'm in my paint history window right here. And now I'm going to do my setup for the auto paint. So first I'm going to make sure I have my transform layer checked. I'm going to click Obey Alpha. If I click the A key, you can see that that is my alpha. If I do a paint stroke, you can see I'm painting inside of that matte, and I don't want that. I actually want the invert of that, inverse. So I'm going to Command Z. So when I do my auto paint, I'm going to make sure that is checked. So the invert alpha. And then I'm also going to now decide which frame I'm going to do my paint stroke on. If I did it on the first frame and I made one stroke, it would only go this far. So I really want to go to the frame where you can see all of the whole area that I want to affect. So if I did my paint stroke from here, it would continue on, and then it would also be visible the entire range. Okay, I'm going to make my paint stroke for the auto paint. I'm just going to drag across the screen. And then I'm going to select my paint stroke here. You can see that. I'm going to make sure match move is clicked on. I want all frames. First, I'm going to actually turn off the stroke line here by just deselecting. Okay. Actually, that will probably stay on. So here's my paint stroke. Match move is selected. I have my transform layer selected, my alpha all set up, and we're just going to click the play button. So now you can see that the paint is playing across the frame, across the sequence. And we'll just deselect that stroke at the end so we can see the paint. So that was a quick way to do some paint. And I can even do a little bit more. You can see over here, it's a little heavy-handed where I started my paint stroke. Well, maybe I'll just do one more stroke. I'm going to take down the opacity to pretty low, maybe for some blending. I'm going to go to the last frame, and I'm just going to do a little bit of paint here, maybe even a lower opacity, just for a little more blending. I've done some of that. Now I can select this layer here and I can just do another auto paint like that. And there you have it. I'll turn off the strokes so you can see it unobstructed. So this is the final result, and it didn't take that long at all. And we'll look at the original and the painted. So you're probably wondering now, after I've done all this paint, how do I get it out of Silhouette? So here you have a paint node and you have your output node, and you just write out here in your output node your destination, your path, and when you have filled all that out, you can just click the render button here and can render out your paint. So you're rendering out your full frame, or you can just do only the painted areas. So if I click the output from the paint, the pink tile here, you can see that I'm only outputting this area here. And so this can be used to be composited over other elements as well. But we'll switch this back to the normal output. And there you have it. And we'll see you in the next class.